As the onset of World War II stunned Europe, Adolf Hitler outsmarted the Western Allies by launching a crushing lightning assault on Norway, before France and Britain could claim the Nordic nation and seize the iron mines supplying the Third Reich. When the Kriegsmarine rushed to the strategic port of Narvik, and the nation's internal defenses crumbled to pieces at the hands of the Wehrmacht, the Royal Navy seized the opportunity to ambush the German fleet and destroy it. Several German and Norwegian ships were destroyed during the spectacular British assault, but soon the hunters became the hunted as the Kriegsmarine counterattacked, forcing the Royal Navy to abandon Narvik and sinking 2 British destroyers in the process. The First Battle of Narvik failed to destroy the German fleet and took one of Britain's most promising naval commanders to the bottom of the sea. But the German ships now lay weakened and exposed, giving the Royal Navy a crucial opportunity to obliterate the Kriegsmarine in one fell swoop. On October 13th, 3 days after the first British assault, 9 British destroyers and 1 aircraft carrier were led by the jewel in the crown of the Royal Navy's fleet, the battleship HMS Warspit, into Narvik. The defending German vessels were in shambles, and they woke to the daunting sight of a massive enemy naval wall and a swarm of seaborne warplanes coming to finish what their countrymen had started. Now or never. After threatening to invade Norway for months if the nation didn't cooperate with assisting Finland and stop supplying Germany, the Allies were beaten to the punch on April 8, 1940, when Hitler launched a devastating, albeit hasty, invasion of the Nordic nation. Outsmarted, but not defeated, the Allies planned to seize the opportunity to use the superior power of the Royal Navy to strike the Kriegsmarine as the soldiers made the perilous dash from Germany to Narvik. However, all interception attempts were futile, with the Royal Navy only being able to destroy a couple of German tankers, but never ambushing the cruising warships. As such, one day after the onset of the invasion, Captain Bernard Warburton Lee volunteered to lead an attack on the port itself and surprise the German destroyers while they refueled. The operation would render mixed results, with the British inflicting heavy damage to ships stationed at the port and sinking 2 German destroyers, but being encircled and overwhelmed at the same time, losing Warburton Lee and his flagship, along with another British destroyer. Even so, the First Battle of Narvik had given way to an unignorable opportunity. The British now knew exactly how many German destroyers were in Narvik, and how many were damaged. With the odds clearly in their favor, the British decided to go all out, and send one of their most potent and imposing capital ships, including HMS Warspit. The iconic battleship would be escorted by travel-class destroyers HMS Bedouin, Cossack, Punjabi, and Eskimo. 5 additional destroyers, HMS Kimberley, Hero, Icarus, Forester, and Foxhound, and the aircraft carrier HMS Furious. Compared to Captain Bernard Warburton Lee's previous force of 5 destroyers, the new party was a war fleet of significant proportions, and its commander, Vice Admiral William Whitworth, was determined to obliterate the German fleet and pave the way for an Allied liberation of Norway. Decisive assault. In the early hours of April 13th, Whitworth's forces arrived at the FJORD, covered by the morning fog. Like the first assault 3 days prior, the Germans were entirely surprised by the daunting British warships emerging over the horizon. Mimicking the Germans' own lightning-fast tactics, the British executed their assault aggressively and overwhelmingly. Warspit immediately deployed its catapult-launched warplane, a float-equipped ferry swordfish that wasted no time swooping down over a German U-boat anchored in the Herjungsfjord near Björkvik. The aircraft engaged the unsuspecting submarine with lethal precision, dropping several bombs and sinking the vessel in a matter of minutes. The unfortunate U-boat would become the first German submarine to be sunk by an aircraft during World War II. Meanwhile, German sailors scrambled to take their destroyers out to sea in a desperate defensive effort that lacked the organization and tactical appraisal the British forces displayed on their attack. Nevertheless, the German destroyer Erich Kellner took advantage of the chaotic scene and attempted to flank the Allied forces to deliver a surprise attack. The endeavor would be futile, as Warspit's swordfish spotted the ship and informed the British vessels of its position before the German vessel could get close enough to the Allies. A barrage of torpedoes and gunfire immediately rained down on the German destroyer, turning her into a burning wreck. The destroyer's commander, Alfred Schultz Hinrichs, and several sailors were pulled out from the water and debris by Norwegian sailors and held as prisoners. Warspit's overwhelming firepower and air support similarly neutralized 2 other German destroyers, and it didn't take long for them to be swallowed by the sea. Identifying her as the most significant threat, Wolfgang Zenker targeted Warspit and attempted to torpedo her several times, but faulty torpedoes and the battleship's maneuvers kept her safe from harm. Bolstered by superior firepower and air support, Warspit and some of her escorts destroyed 3 of the 8 German destroyers operating off of Narvik. Fjord Clash. Not everything went smoothly for the British forces. The seaborne aircraft had a tough time engaging the German destroyers, and they had a modest effect on the German vessels and their crews. Moreover, 2 British warplanes would not make it back to the carrier due to German anti-aircraft fire or mechanical malfunction. As the British fleet pushed further into the fjord, the 5 remaining German destroyers were forced to retreat. They had barely had any time to resupply after the last attack, and now they found themselves out of ammunition and running their engines on fumes. The order for retreat, however, arrived too late for German destroyer Hermann Kunne, who stayed behind even when her sister ships fled the scene. By the time the vessel executed her retreat, HMS Eskimo was in hot pursuit of her. Incredibly, Eskimo could not land a single hit against Hermann Kunne, and the fugitive destroyer made it all the way to the Bay of Trollvika, where her crew abandoned the ship after rigging her with explosives to scuttle her. As the last German sailors left the vessel, Eskimo arrived at the site and unleashed 2 torpedoes. A large explosion consumed the German ship, and she sank to the seabed in a matter of minutes. To this day, it is unclear if the blast was caused by the German explosives or by the British torpedo attack. Then, as Eskimo attempted to leave the area, she was ambushed by Georg Thiel and Hans Ludemann. The 2 German destroyers were low on ammunition, but pummeled Eskimo and destroyed her bow section in a synchronized assault. The British warship barely escaped. Back at the port, the German destroyers Dieter von Roeder and Erich Giese were shackled in place. Severe engine problems had forced them to remain docked, but when the British fleet got within range, they attacked. The docked destroyers managed to deal considerable damage to Punjabi and Cossack, but the British forces ultimately sank them before they could inflict any more damage. Soon, the British fleet gained complete control of the waters around Narvik. The remaining German destroyers had no fuel or ammunition, and after retreating from the scene, their crews scuttled the vessels. The only German warship that survived the attack was U-51. The outcome. Warspit became an insurmountable obstacle for the German forces in Narvik. The colossal battleship not only helped sink the 8 German destroyers in the area, but also inflicted significant damage to the shore batteries and defense installations the Germans had set up on the coast. From the very start of the war, the Allies knew the German Navy had limited assets, especially when compared to the might of the Royal Navy. After the Second Battle of Narvik, close to 50% of Germany's entire destroyer force had been obliterated, dealing an unspeakable blow to German operations in Norway. In total, the Germans lost 1,000 men, 8 destroyers, and 1 submarine. 2,600 German sailors survived and made it to the Norwegian shores, where they quickly formed an improvised marine infantry unit, the Kriegsmarine. The unit helped the German army fight in the ensuing land battles, despite being significantly unprepared to fight in the snow-covered mountains of Norway. In the grand scheme of things, the destruction of the German fleet at Narvik highlighted a critical watershed in the Norwegian campaign. For the remainder of the fighting in the country, the Allies would enjoy complete air and naval superiority in the region. Although their subsequent counter-invasion was slow and sometimes chaotic, the Allied Expeditionary Force eventually began to make gains in liberating the Nordic nation. Nevertheless, every effort would be futile, and every gain from the Allies would eventually be undone. By the summer of 1941, the Wehrmacht had overwhelmed France, and the defeat of the Allied nation was looming ever closer. The troops in Norway had to urgently withdraw, and every war effort had to be diverted to the defense of France. At the end of the day, despite formidable victories, like the one attained during the Second Battle of Narvik, Norway was doomed to remain in the hands of Nazi Germany. Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, check out our story about the First Battle of Narvik and many other thrilling military anecdotes in our other Dark Documentaries channels. We publish new content regularly, so stay tuned.